They knew that any American president or a despotic Congress could start to round people up, and that's why they enshrined the due process. That's why they cared so much about the right for American citizens to be heard and to be protected and to not be locked up and abused. And the second thing I want to say to you is, okay, right now it's 3 U.S. citizens who were called enemy combatants and rounded up, but don't you find it scary that the president has the power to say, to make that 12 tomorrow or 30? And let me tell you again from my study of closing societies, tipping points like this don't take many arrests. If 30 journalists were called enemy combatants tomorrow, it would be over. You would have radio silence. You know that in Latin America, in closed societies, people still publish newspapers, they still have radio, they still have TV, they still have elections. Despots in closed societies hold elections because that's a point of pride to them. What they do not have is liberty. And let me ask you this, you know, no, it's not enough for me. Would you want to spend 3 years in a cell 10 by 12 in a Navy brig in solitary confinement with people making it difficult for you to see your family or talk to your lawyer?
Absolutely not, and that's why we require a system, requires the president to come forth with articulable evidence, and requires the ability to challenge that evidence. Indeed, Jose Padilla was just convicted just last month in a court of law based upon the evidence that was presented to that court.
Thank God, although you know, you didn't hear the original highly touted charges.
No, well, sure, because that evidence reportedly came from KSM and Bin Oshib, and they did not want, obviously, to produce KSM and Bin Oshib in court. One question for you, though.
But no, I'm not going to. Respectfully, I'm not going to let you, you know, make it seem legal when it's when
well, no, the final charging document. The final charging document did not ended. With Mr. Padilla entering the camp, so none of that evidence came.
That's not my point. My point is that the president can hold an American citizen for months or years in solitary confinement while this unfolds, and by that time, psychiatrists know mentally strong, resilient, healthy people like you and me, or our families who fled oppression like this, go crazy because solitary confinement drives you mad. They knew that in Stalin's Gulag. You know, you've got to take a look at the section on the Gulag because Guantanamo is set up to parallel what Stalin did with the Gulag and the practices in Guantanamo, the use of dogs, the use of extremes of heat and cold, the use of solitary confinement to punish people, the forced confessions, the standing positions, stress positions, which Rumsfeld defended, those come straight from the Gulag.
My question is as follows. Let's start from your very first, which is a very good point, which is the invocation of a real or imagined threat as the first of your 10 steps. Do you think the threat that we currently face is a real or an imaginary threat, and it is or either is it being misused by those in power, apparently including the courts, in order to justify this supposed assault on civil liberties?
It's certainly a real threat, and it's certainly being misused, hyped, distorted, manipulated to drive through this agenda. And I should share with you what I think is the motivator of the agenda. You know, America is not driven by ideologies the way Mussolini's Italy or Hitler's Germany is driven by ideologies. What drives big historical motion in America is often money and profit, and I think I've kind of found the smoking gun. We need to hype an enemy right now for economic reasons. I'm sorry to say this because it goes to Hannah Arendt's point about the banality of evil, but you know, I think a third of the U.S. economy is the defense industry, the weapons industry, and when we had a Soviet enemy, we had a big strapping enemy that justified and necessitated, of course, reasonably, this massive arms buildup with its attendant profits to shareholders. But in the wake of the fall of the Berlin Wall, we lost that enemy, and arms manufacturers lost that enemy. And so they were really looking into the face of declining market share for a world essentially, you know, not riven by these two superpowers being at war. And so it is not uninteresting to me that in the wake of attacks by Al-Qaeda around the world, defense manufacturers began to turn from Cold War style weapons systems manufacture to surveillance and homeland security type technology to build market share. Okay, well, if that's what you're doing, you see a way to grow your industry. It's not surprising to me to discover, I share with readers in The End of America, that what's become what a member of the Trilateral Commission calls the security industrial complex now has their own lobbyists. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Blackwater and other contractors like Raytheon just got a $15 billion contract. This technology is growing and growing, and if you need to build this technology, you need to hype an enemy. And the best way to make sure to grow your market share in the future is to make sure that the enemy is us, to build and build domestic surveillance. The Wall Street Journal, I beg your pardon, the New York Times just ran a big set of stories on how Wall Street is investing in the Chinese police state because the profits of surveilling and doing police investigations, it's called a dangan, the threefold dossier, which this guy in the government, in the U.S. government, was just describing to me as beginning with civil servants here. You know, the work life, the family life, the scrutiny that follows you from place to place, even as you move, huge profits there. So the West is investing in the Chinese police state, investing in ever-proliferating surveillance of Chinese citizens. Well, it's profitable there, it's profitable here. And so I think we need to notice that there's a massive financial incentive to hype the terror threat. Many people are making huge fortunes.
You brought up the example before the break of England, Spain, and our European allies. England, of course, has had its own traditional threat with the Irish terrorists for a number of years, and now facing, obviously, a current terror threat. The report that I think that maybe quoting your book, but certainly the report, a official report, counts thousands upon thousands of surveillance cameras. And I think the average is per average person gets snapped 32 cameras on an average day. And we in America, you know, are just at the starting point of those things. Spain and other European countries have traditionally, for a number of years, been very effective at using preventive detention, which is permitted in their law for a period of months up to a year, included, and indeed the UK adopted the same measure until recently. We don't, you know, those are much more dramatic, much more drastic measures in some ways, or at least comparable responses in other ways. Why are we not seeing the same type of criticism, the same kind of concern and so-called tipping point in those kind of society? Why are we holding them up as examples?
Yeah, I respectfully very much disagree with you that those kinds of actions are being deployed in the way they're being deployed here. It's clear to me, you know, I used to live in Israel, and Israel faces real terrorists every single day, and real terror attacks and real explosions. And people in Israel do not walk around in the state of fear that Americans are walking around in now, because the assumption is that Mossad is doing its work, and Mossad is quietly doing its work, and that when people need to know something, it's practical information. There's nothing like the red, orange, yellow alert there that there is here. That would be considered insane over there, where the real job is to catch and track terrorists. So what you get is like avoid Machne Yehuda, which is a marketplace, you know, on Friday afternoon, because there's real intelligence. And in fact, Israelis make it a point of pride to not live in fear and to not let terrorists take away what makes civil society valuable. And I'm certainly not seeing in the countries that you mentioned the hyped threat of terror, the fact of the real terror threat being used to drive a political agenda that intimidates and coerces citizens.
The book is The End of America. The author is Naomi Wolfe. Thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to talk to you.
Take care.